Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Korina Smith to the show. Korina has over 20 years of experience leading teams on humanitarian missions to deliver humanitarian aid and facilitate sustainable projects in villages, relief camps, and orphanages around the world. Korina recently launched a website called The Conscious Citizen Effect, designed to help us all learn to make more conscious consumer choices and everyday habits that are kinder to our planet, animals, and our local and global communities. Korina, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Raj. How are
I'm
you?
doing fantastic and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good to talk to you.
You too. Korina, I usually start the show off by asking my guest something interesting about them, but after reading your bio, I have to ask, path.
I've always been attracted to humanitarian causes since I was a young child. I'm one of those people who kind of knew what they wanted to do from a very early young age. I was just born that way. I can't help it. I would see the commercials for Feed the Children, and I'd just be glued to the screen and immediately wanted to do something or help in any way that I could. And really young, I would do things like collect change from the couch and try to mail it and address the envelope to the poor, and it would return back to me. The mailman would return the envelope back, or I would always just try to troubleshoot and how can I help. I wanted to come up with ideas, and I was just frustrated with what I saw, knowing it wasn't necessary. And so when I got a little older, early teens, I started volunteering with a nonprofit that my dad connected me with. My dad is an airline nonprofit that my dad connected me with. My dad is an airline pilot for many years. He's retired now, and as a result, I had free airfare for anywhere pretty
Wow.
much in the world that American Airlines flew to. So I started traveling with this nonprofit he connected me with called Airline Ambassadors
Hmm.
International, and it was mainly for employees, airline employees, to use their time and their free airfare. And before 9/11, we actually had a lot more cargo shipment benefits as well. And so a lot of flight attendants and pilots and crew members and other airline employees, we would, go take these trips around the world, and we would deliver needed supplies, all over the place. And so I started traveling with them as soon as I could. I want to say age 15, maybe even late 14, early 15, I started traveling with them. It was amazing.
So, how did your parents handle such an aware child?
So they were, when I look back at the helicopter parents, they were not helicopter
Hmm.
parents at all. They just, I mean, I flew to Manila all by myself at like 16 years old and connected through Tokyo. And I don't know many parents do that anymore, but I think they knew me. They knew I was very independent. I was very trustworthy. I wasn't the type of kid to get in a lot of trouble ever, or anything like that. I mean, nothing major. And I was just very mature as a child, and they knew that. And they encouraged, both of them encouraged me to travel. My mom was a very adventurous person and traveler, and she still is a very adventurous person. And so I think I definitely got the adventurous spirit from her. And my dad was a pilot, so he was used to navigating airports and travel. And he knew I wanted to do something like this. And so with their blessing, and they trusted me to travel with other crew members and airline employees. And so with their blessing, and they trusted me to travel with other crew members and airline employees. I felt like I would be very safe with them, and I really was. So it was great.
That is pretty amazing. So, on your early trips, let's say when you were 15, 16 years old and going out to these, I guess they would call them now emerging markets, um, what are some of the things you started learning at an early age?
Well, one of the first things I picked up, one of my first humanitarian missions, the first few were to Brazil and the Philippines, and I learned how happy kids my age were, families were, people were, despite how difficult their, physical surroundings were, or how much poverty they were in, or the things they didn't have. They still seemed to have laughter and joy and a lot of love for each other and families. And it was almost like, it's not that those things around them didn't matter, but it's almost like they had their priorities straight. And predominantly white, it has very little diversity and is middle to upper class where I grew up, I knew that, while there is a lot of happiness and joy, there was definitely human connection that was missing. And some of the cultures I was more familiar with. And so that was a really quick draw and made me want more to travel and to learn from these
So
cultures.
when you would come back from your trips, how would you feel when you were back here stateside?
Definitely I went through a lot of what they call reverse culture shock. And especially after living abroad in college, it would hit me harder when you're away for a long time. But, I struggled when I was younger and first experiencing these things. I mean, it's been many years now, and I handle these things differently. At that age, you're kind of confused. A lot of people, aren't as excited about travel, and you want to tell them all about your trip and what you experienced, what you saw. And sometimes your, friends or family members are like, "Oh, how's your?" And sometimes your, friends or family members are like, "Oh, how was your trip? That's great." And, you can't really share with them everything you experienced because they wouldn't really understand. And then you'd kind of, for me, I would often question things like, well, do we have to do things this way? Or why don't we eat, better food, like more fresh
Hmm.
food that this amazing food I've just had and we're eating Hot Pockets, like, so a lot of, a lot of little basic things as well. So it was hard as a young person for sure.
So you mentioned something regarding human connection. Fast forward all these years. Where do you think we are on that arc of human connection here in the States?
I think we have a long way to go. I think we probably are better than we were in the, mid 90s when I was doing the traveling for the first time. Um, I think that, people are longing for that human connection and yearning for it. And there are a lot of people that, families outside their families and really valuing their, relationships. But I think we have a long way to go. There are a lot of people who are very lonely. There are a lot of people who don't have the special relationships and friendships that, luckily I've certainly focused on developing. And some people just don't know how. And some people just don't know how to relate to others. And
Hmm.
it's important. We need to do that and show that and make that a priority, I think. What do you think?
I agree, and I think your new endeavor can help solve some of these challenges. So if you can share some information about the Conscious Citizen Effect, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So this is a website I launched in 2019, and it came out of just a frustration of not really understanding how to make the best choices. As you know, from a ch- as a since I was of not really understanding how to make the best choices. As you know, from a ch- as a since I was a child, I wanted to kind of help make the world a better place or do something or be proactive. And I found myself wanting to make good consumer decisions and choices, but I didn't know what they were because everything out there tends to be so confusing. We oftentimes, as a society, as an American society, we don't know what's true, what is true, what's not true, what's fact, what's not fact. We, don't know which studies to trust or who's behind the studies. And there were just basic questions that I didn't know the answer to. Like, for example, I wanted to buy, I was eating more meat at the time. I've started not eating as much meat, but I wanted to know, how can I buy ethical meat? What does that mean? And it was very difficult to find that. And eggs, what I've been buying cage-free eggs for years, thinking that was like a humane thing to do. Well, it turns out it's helping myself like learn how to make better decisions and just sharing with others what I'm learning. Um, and just being aware and aware of our choices and how they infect or impact other people has been, really interesting.
The tag on your Conscious Citizen Effect, kinder to our planet, animals, and our local and global communities. I think that, and I could be wrong, so please correct me. That piece about the loneliness and bringing people together, I think that falls under that kinder to our local and global communities. Is that true?
I think that's exactly right. I think we aren't aware of how connected that we are. We just often make choices that are for our own personal convenience and our own self serving interests. And we don't realize that my choices make an impact on someone I've never met before. And someone I've never met before make choices and they can impact me. And, we really are allies. And sometimes if we can just kind of be aware of that, it makes us consider things differently and care a little bit more about other people. It's so easy to be in our own bubbles and to just focus on the few people in our little circles. But the reality is, there are amazing people around the world, everywhere, and down the street that you've never met before that, are just like you or me. And we're good people trying to do our best, making a better future for our children. And, we're all connected, and we should just be aware of that so that we make better
You asked me a
choices.
question earlier, and I kind of switched gears on you. I feel like a lot of this is being caused by our digital differences and some of the challenges
Hmm.
around devices, screen time. You mentioned the word bubbles, echo chambers, perhaps, but I feel like if we took the opportunity to step away from the devices and sat down with more diverse individuals and kind of explored each other, I really feel like there's a lot to be learned there. And I think that contributes to that, your vision of global and local communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I found, coming from an area that lacks so much diversity, I think it's a little better now, but not much. I've gone out and lived in different cities and different countries, and when you love someone who's a different color than you, or you love someone who's of a different religion, or you love someone and have a, wonderful friendship with people that come from, parts of the world that, people in your neighborhood where you grew up think is a scary part of the world, you know, um, you don't think about people in such a
Hmm.
negative way anymore. And so I agree with you, creating relationships with people who are different from you, different age, just different background and understood. It's why one of the reasons I'm such an advocate for travel. I always have been convinced, if we travel more, we will have more peace on the planet and Earth, because we will be less judgmental of each other and less scared of each other.
So,
So anyway,
do
I
you feel
agree with
like
you.
travel should almost be mandatory?
I mean, I think travel should be easier. Um, there are some people that have truly no interest in doing, and I would hate for someone to, be forced to do something they don't want to do, obviously. But I do think it should be more, it's become more common. And a lot of people don't travel because it's such a pain in the neck and it's so expensive and etc. But I do think we need to do something to make travel easier, more
Accessible?
practical, again, more common, accessible. Exactly. Yeah. Do you think it should be a
I think there
requirement?
should be more, especially at a younger age. I think there should be more study abroad opportunities. And again, we can get
Hmm.
into a whole political debate of funding these endeavors. But I feel like I do feel like it
Hmm.
should be easier, more accessible, and I don't know what the grant situation looks like for travel for young kids. But to your point, I grew up in London, but we spent a lot of our childhood traveling to East Africa, traveling to America, traveling to Europe. And I think that the lessons I learned as a young child, especially traveling to East Africa, have lived with me all these years. When you come across individuals that don't look like you, don't act like you, and they're living through certain situations or certain conditions, you come home and you start questioning all the things that you have, and you know could life be different. But b, I think that that residue stays with you throughout your life. You view life very differently than if you don't explore. And I feel like perhaps, maybe not mandatory, maybe mandatory is too strong of a word, but there should be more travel programs in school. um, I've got three young ones,
Hmm.
and we're actually challenged with the opposite right now. And I'm hearing more and more parents actually complain that because the kids have so many activities to do during summer, that travel is actually cut down, and also traveling is
Mm.
a unexcused absence. And so, for example, we're thinking about
Mm.
going overseas during the Christmas holiday, but we have to maintain that 2 week schedule, and we can't really go out of bounds unless we want to go through the whole unexcused absence and then truancy process. So it's I think I think the system makes it harder
Mm.
to do so, but I do encourage it, and we still, regardless of what we need to do, will decide to
Hmm.
travel.
That's right. Good. Good for you. That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, I forgot we have that Kenyan connection too. Now from our first, couple of
Yes.
coffee meetings years ago. I
So
forgot
some of
about
the
that.
what are some of the steps or some of the
Yeah.
hows to become a more conscious citizen?
Well, okay. So I think the first thing is just to here's what conscious even means. I looked up, the definition when I was starting the website. It means to be aware of and responding to one's surroundings or to be awake. And that's what conscious means. And so the first thing to do is to become aware of when you purchase something or make a decision, what that looks like, what that means, what is it that I'm doing. So, for example, for me, I have a lot of decisions that I make about food and animals, that I know have a bigger consequence on the planet. So I'm just kind of trying to learn what that means. Okay, if I buy these, mushrooms that are wrapped in plastic packaging and I'm just going to immediately throw that away, what was the point of that? That's pointless. I don't need to do that. Or, if I only buy meat and I'm fueling the, meat industry and the consequences that has on the planet, is that, really, really worth it? Or, just being, I would say the first thing is just to be aware. It's amazing the things that are occurring to me now that weren't occurring to me 8 months ago before I started deciding to be more conscious about my choices. Things that I've ignored for years or just never thought of or just weren't on the radar. So once you kind of make a decision, I would like to be more aware of the choices I make. Things are going to come to you that, you're going to start to question. And that's the whole point.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a minute. Karina, I'm just so busy. Can you make it easy for me? Do you have like a one-page handout or something that I can just turn to and say, when I'm shopping, I should behave this way or look for these signs when I'm, doing things in my daily life? Do you have something along those lines?
Yeah, I would just say that, when you're doing any shopping, luckily I've written a lot of articles and have done the research for
Thank you.
you on a lot of the things I have written about. So you don't have to do it yourself. I mean, that was kind of the whole point. But I would just say when you're making a decision, think about the consequence that it has on animals, on the planet, on your local and global communities. So is this item I'm buying, is it animal cruelty free? Or is this entertainment that I'm attending animal cruelty free? So, for example, I'm not going to go to any more Sea Worlds personally. I will never do that again. I'm not going to, support. I'm not going to go ride elephants in Thailand because I know that, those have been, they've been poorly treated to be
Hmm.
rideable. So, for example, that's one thing, you want to be aware of. The next aware of is what's the consequence on the planet. So reduce your reusable, reduce your plastic, single-use plastics, for example. That's another thing you can easily do, and there's a lot of ways you can do that. I've got a few articles that have helped me to make those little changes. I need to get better. I'm still learning and trying to find out new services, but I would reduce your personal plastic use. Um, I would consider food choices by thinking about animal welfare, number one, and then number two, the planet. And that's a whole nother conversation. And then you want to just be aware of, your impact you have on your local and global community. So is this project going to support, my local community? Is it, at the expense of child labor somewhere? So just ask yourself those three questions. Is this helping, um, before you buy
Hmm.
something? So I would say, a page on my website about living a conscious lifestyle that, anyone can check out. It's just keeping those in mind. So the consciouscitizeneffect.com, and, you'll see the conscious life sure. But I'd say those are easy to do.
I'll
Yeah.
put a link to it on the show notes. Let's have that conversation right now about the planet. Tell me about impact to the planet.
Yes, absolutely. So we're seeing this spike in plant-based food, and I've seen a lot of documentaries about, why people are probably number one reducing their meat consumption or turning into vegetarians or even vegans. And it has to do with the impact that the meat industry has on, global warming, or I shouldn't say global warming, but climate change and the devastation of, forests around the world. And, those were to me kind of what sparked my interest in learning more about how, we're big meat lovers. So that was the initial attraction for me. But for me recently, what's really been interesting is learning about my own, nutrition and, what's if something's great for the planet, but it's if it's for example, if eating meat is bad for the planet, but it's good for me personally, it's going to be really hard to change. But when I find out that it's bad for the planet, but it's also not healthy for me personally, then it's easier to make that change. So I think it's about, definitely about education. And so meat and dairy are probably the biggest things that I've been aware of and how much of an impact those have on the planet. And how about you? You've kind of made a change in your diet, right? If I
I
understand
did. I made the
correctly.
shift to become a vegetarian back in 2017. It was just a moment I had. I remember it was March of 2017, and I just decided I just decided I didn't need it anymore. And it wasn't actually at that time. It wasn't even a conscious effort regarding planet or animals or anything. It just I have three daughters, and I was kind of looking at the foods that we were eating in the house and trying to be conscious about some of the hormones and the changes, in their lives and what we could do to, whether it was contribute less to those effects or some of the foods that we were taking in. I just decided I didn't need it anymore, and my point was to live by example, and then they would see that and perhaps question the same thing. So we've drastically cut back on on meat in our house, meat consumption. I don't preach it to them. I say they can make their own choices, but when it comes to parenting, it's easier to lead by example than telling them. So
Hmm.
that was my reason for doing so.
Awesome. That's interesting. So you kind of were focused on your own, health and the health of your kids. And
Absolutely.
it turns out, and yeah, and that's what's great about the conscious, citizen is sometimes you become aware of what's better for you is also sometimes better for the environment. And and that's a prime example. It's better for everybody. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. So staying with the conscious citizen for a moment, there are many, many people, I'm sure hundreds, if not thousands of individuals that feel this kind of impetus in their life, um, but they don't make an effort to, start a business organization regarding or around that. Why now? What pushed you to launch it now?
You know, I just am so sick of being confused and unaware about everything, I and it just seems like now there's more than ever um, a demand to think critically about things. I mean, we're seeing so much happening in the world, and we're seeing these consequences. I mean, look, it just heart breaks for things that are going on, like in Australia right now, for example. And you just kind of sometimes have to take responsibility yourself for things. We can't keep expecting other people to do everything for us and create solutions. Sometimes we just need to do things ourselves or help others do things. And it just seems like now's the right time. I happen to have a few months off this summer. And so I decided to pour my energy into learning things I've always wanted to learn more about. I mean, being curious and wanting to learn has been key. And I just happened to have some time off to do that. And that's why I did it this particular time in my life.
So, what do you see the conscious citizen evolving into?
Well, the main goal for this particular website is to help accelerate culture change. Um, we are seeing companies making, wonderful changes and adjustments, but we have a long way to go. And the reality is that as consumers, we have the power to demand, what we want. We shop with our wallets. When I first started the website, the only place I could buy pasture raised eggs, which are the most ethical eggs you can buy if you eat eggs, were either from the farmer's market or Whole Foods had some pasture raised eggs. But since I've started, and a few months later, Trader Joe's used to not have them. Now Trader Joe's has pasture raised eggs because people were asking for them, and now I can buy them in the basic grocery stores as well. The demand has expanded, and so that's the goal of the website is to help consumers demand conscious options so that companies can adjust to what we're demanding. So that's the overall goal.
I love the idea, and I look forward to seeing where you go with that. Oh, what's your puppy's name?
I've got I've got Caesar the Great. He's in my little blindies, and I've got Chloe Simone. And yeah, they hear someone outside.
I'm sure.
Sorry about that.
No, no problem at all. So, what I was going to say is, last question I have for you is that if you could share some advice with the audience, what would it be?
Well, I would say two things. Number one, your choices matter. You matter. It's so easy to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I do. We have to wait for these big companies to make big changes. But really, it does matter. Just making little adjustments and little lifestyle changes is how a whole culture changes. And so it does matter what you do. And I would also just say the other part to it is that loving other people is all that really matters. And that's what I personally believe. And when you causes and calls to action, it's really because we want a better world for other people that we love, our kids, our grandkids, our, people that we love. So if you can just focus on, loving other people, making choices, being aware of your impact on others, I think the entire world would be much better off.
I think leaving it at loving other people is a beautiful place to stop. Karina, thank you so much for being on, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Okay. Thank you, Raj. I appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.